Did you search the house for any other matching glasses?
No, no,
Matter of fact, you didn't search the house for any physical items, did you?
of course not.
Is that because that house belonged to a Boston police officer?
No, it's because it requires probable cause, as you know, which we did not have.
Or at least you didn't think you had at that time?
We knew we didn't have it.
Did you seek it from a judge?
I'm familiar with what probable cause is.
Did you seek a probable cause warrant from a judge?
No, I did not.
Right.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another week of covering the Karen Reid trial. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And welcome back to those of you returning. Hard to believe it's the second week of proceedings already. That time has flown by, hasn't it? Today we're going to be exploring the cross-examination of the defence. Lieutenant Paul Gallagher is in the firing line this morning, and he is the very first to be giving testimony this week. So he's a Canton police officer, and he will certainly be giving some insights as to more details regarding the police process and procedure on the early hours of the event. In my opinion, it does sound a little bit casual, doesn't it? I mean, you make your own mind up. Monday morning, images were presented depicting the collection of blood at the location where John O'Keefe's body was discovered that fateful morning. Lieutenant Paul Gallagher of the Canton Police Department testified about the process, explaining that snow containing red drops was placed into solo cups and then into Stop and Shop paper bag before being transported to the Canton Police Station. That doesn't sound like a normal procedure, does it really? Photos shown to jurors displayed the reddish snow inside the cups as the evidence was transferred to Massachusetts State Police investigators on February the 1st, 2022. Gallagher further detailed the scene processing on that morning O'Keefe was found, including the odd decision, and maybe it's not odd, maybe this happens all the time, but it seems unusual, to use a leaf blower in the vicinity where his body was located after it was taken to the hospital. The leaf blower uncovered pieces of broken glass and darker red spots on the snow, which was suspected to be blood. And initially, no pieces of tail light or a missing shoe belonging to O'Keefe were found, although later statements from Norfolk prosecutors indicated that tail light fragments were discovered at the scene by Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor. The red solo cups that were used for collecting the samples were actually obtained from a neighbour's house, with 6 samples placed into 6 cups for analysis. Let's kick straight into it with the cross-examination by the defence. I certainly sense no love lost between these two. Once again, let's keep the comments respectful and as empathetic as possible. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And thanks for subscribing to Awesome.
When was the first time you were ever interviewed about your conduct on this case, your involvement in this case?
I don't recall.
It was about a month ago, wasn't it? April 3rd, 2024?
When I was interviewed by, I don't know who you're referring to.
Formal interview by any law enforcement agency.
Oh, I was never, until about a month ago, trial prep, I was not interviewed, correct.
And that interview was conducted by whom?
I met at the DA's office with the prosecutor, Adam Lowley.
And there was also a state trooper there?
There was.
Lieutenant Tully?
Correct.
Okay. So Michael Proctor never formally interviewed you about your involvement in the case?
No, sir.
Never interviewed you about your involvement on the morning of January 29th, 2022?
No, sir.
Never interviewed you about your recovery of any physical evidence at the scene?
No, sir.
Which would include the blood stains as well as the piece of drinking glass?
That's correct.
Okay. Never interviewed you about where that evidence ultimately went and how it made its way back to Canton Police Department?
He never interviewed me, no.
And his partner, Yuri Buchnick, also, I won't go through the litany of things, never interviewed you as well?
Correct.
And until April 3rd, 2024, nobody from the DA's office had interviewed you either?
That's correct.
Did you write a report about your involvement in the case?
Not on that particular day.
Did you write a report after that?
Yes.
When did you write that report?
Possibly January 2023. I believe it was the request for the metadata, the acquisition of the photos report.
Okay. Fair enough. Did you ever, I'll narrow my question. Did you ever write a report about your involvement on the day at the scene?
No, I did not.
So that's not documented, at least by you, that's not documented anywhere.
That's correct.
Did you take notes when you were at the scene?
No,
Did you go back to the station and memorialize your findings and your conduct at the scene by taking notes back at the station?
no, I did not.
So you have no notes and no report about anything that happened at Fairview on the 29th?
Not myself, no.
Were you ever instructed by any superior? You're pretty high up in the ranks. You reported to whom?
At that time, I reported to the deputy chief of police.
Right, either the deputy chief or the chief.
Correct.
Did either the deputy chief or the chief instruct you, Lieutenant, don't worry about writing a report in this case?
No, they never said anything like that.
You would agree that it's one thing to respond to a scene, it's another thing to actually gather evidence at a scene.
That's correct.
Especially a scene where it's a potential, at that time, a potential homicide of a police officer.
That's correct.
Part of the reason for annotating, memorializing exactly what evidence is recovered is so you can relay that to other officers, correct?
Correct.
So for instance, in your direct examination just a few minutes ago, you said that you went back to the scene at one point. What was the date where the drone was considered?
February 1st.
You go back to the scene on February 1st. That's 3 full days after the event, correct?
That is correct.
After the incident. And you said, I directed them to where John O'Keefe's body was found, correct?
Yeah, I showed him. Yes.
But in fact, you never saw John O'Keefe's body, did you?
That's correct.
Okay, so you were giving them information that you had about which you had no personal knowledge, correct?
I had knowledge from other officers. I did not see John O'Keefe at the scene. He was transported to the hospital. That is correct. Yes.
Right. So you couldn't determine exactly how he was positioned, right?
Not precisely.
From head to toe, right?
Not precisely.
Where his arms or his hands were.
That is correct. Yes.
He's a 6'2" man, correct?
I don't know.
You don't even know that?
I don't know his size. No.
If I told you that he's over 6 feet tall, would you have any quarrel with that?
If Mr. Lally told me, I would take it as fact.
For purposes of my question, you don't want to take my word for it, but for purposes of this question, assuming that he's over 6 feet tall, there's a better than 6 foot margin for where he would be situated in the snow, correct? From toe to head.
Correct.
And the details matter in a case like this. Any investigation, the details matter.
Sure they do.
Accuracy is vital in a homicide investigation, correct?
Correct.
You did find some blood droplets. We saw it on the screen, correct?
Correct.
You also found part of a drinking glass, correct?
That is correct.
Did you engage or did you endeavor to make a diagram of exactly where those items were found?
No.
You're aware, as you were the former chief of detectives?
I was a detective sergeant.
Detective sergeant. You were supervisor over detectives.
Correct.
You're aware what cross coordinates are in measuring a crime scene, correct?
Yes.
You take a stable item like a flagpole, for instance, that might be one that doesn't move. You measure exactly from a compass position, exactly north or exactly west, a number of inches, maybe even down to meters and millimeters if you use that instead of inches, using meters, right?
Yeah, we don't employ that process.
So you don't employ a process where you could measure something from a known item north, south, east, or west, and then measure it from another known item and have an exact cross point of where that's
We don't typically exercise in that in our investigative unit.
You knew how to do that, though.
Yes.
I mean, you've been trained on how to do that.
Yes.
But you didn't employ that technique here.
No.
So the glass, where the glass was found, it's sort of an estimate.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. And where the blood was found, that's kind of an estimate also.
Yeah, we would guess that would be where his body was. Yes.
Okay. You just used the word guess.
Yes.
Right? But if you had actually documented it using cross coordinates, you wouldn't have to guess. You'd know exactly where the tip of his head was, where the tip of his toes were, correct?
No.
Why not?
Because he wasn't there when we got there.
Fair enough. When I say you, I meant other officers. If someone had employed that before he was moved, they could have figured out exactly how he was situated where he was in that yard, correct?
It would never happen. Life-saving measures come first. The officers are not going to start measuring while first responders are conducting life-saving measures. It doesn't happen.
That's exactly right. But once the body was moved, for instance, Officer Saraf, who's literally standing there, could have said, okay, I just saw the tip of his head right here. He's now on the gurney. And he could have measured that, right?
He could have, yes.
And then he could have said the tip of his toes were right here, and he could have measured that.
Yes.
And certainly, when there's no life-saving measures at play, you could have done the same thing with the drinking glass and the blood spots.
That's correct.
And in terms of recovering those blood spots, I'll get back to that in a second, but in terms of recovering those blood spots, you indicated that you used temporary evidence containers, correct?
Plastic cups, I said, yes.
Before responding to 34 Fairview, and you indicated that you were told to respond to 32 Fairview, right?
That is correct.
That was a mistake on either dispatch's part or something.
Correct.
You figured out where to go once you got there.
You can tell by the emergency lights.
It was Sergeant Good who contacted you, correct?
That is correct.
And you were at home at the time,
That is correct.
which is why you needed to respond to Canton PD to get some foul weather here, correct?
Correct.
You also contacted Brian Albert's neighbor, a gentleman by the name of Tom Keller, correct?
That is correct.
And you wanted to let him know that you were responding over to the scene.
Yes, he was the lieutenant in charge of detectives at the time.
Lieutenant in charge of detectives and also the man who lived directly across the street from Brian Albert, correct?
I would say there's two property lines he's directly across from, 32 and 34.
Okay.
But yes, that vicinity.
Okay. Is there a reason that you didn't contact Chief Berkowitz on that day to let him know where you were responding? Why did you pick Deputy Chief Keller?
Because that would be my next call. Like I said, he is the lieutenant in charge of detectives at the time. We were responding to a possible crime scene, a possible unattended death. He would be my call.
The normal chain of command.
Correct.
Okay. That you knew at the time that Chief Berkowitz was actually out on leave, having been injured on duty in some similar way.
I don't recall that. Chief Berkowitz is always present.
Not only did you respond to the scene, but either you were tasked by one of your superiors, or you, as the ranking officer on the. I guess I should ask this first. Forgive me. Were you the ranking officer on scene when you arrived?
Yes, sir, I was.
So either having been tasked by one of your superiors, or because you were the ranking officer on scene, did you take over the coordination of the preservation of that crime scene?
Yes, I did.
So others were sort of answering to you.
Correct.
You indicated that you had never preserved a crime scene in the snow before.
That's correct.
30 years plus, and your policing experiences here in the Boston area,
Correct.
snow's a lot.
Sure.
In 30 plus years, you've never processed a crime scene in the snow?
No, I have not.
Lucky you.
Well, we don't typically process our own crime scenes. Sometimes we use the state police. Sometimes we use Plymouth County detectives.
So save the state police, or setting them aside because they were not tasked on this call yet.
Right.
You were then in charge of preserving this crime scene, right?
That's correct.
What exactly did you do, if you can name the categories? What exactly did you do to actually preserve the entire crime scene?
Sure. I can tell you that I had Sergeant Good move all the cars so I could photograph the scene, documented by photo evidence. I told Detective Sergeant Lake, make sure he has initial statements from everybody present. And that's basically what we did prior to searching the scene itself.
With regard to Sergeant Lang, you told him to make sure that we had statements, your words, we had statements from all the witnesses that were at the scene.
Initial statements, yes.
Does that mean the people inside the house?
Yes.
Maybe people across the street, if there were people across the street?
No, it didn't include them at the time. It included people that were involved from the prior night's incident outing, I would call it.
At the time that you tasked Sergeant Lang with this responsibility, Did you know personally that you were standing on the property of Brian Albert?
I did.
Did you also know that Sergeant Lank had an ongoing and a long time relationship with the Albert family?
Objection.
Did you know that?
I know he knew them. I think you're mischaracterizing the relationship.
Did you see a problem with having somebody who knew the parties taking the initial statements from those parties?
Not at all. Sergeant Lank, no issue at all.
Not in your mind.
Not in my mind.
Were you aware that before you got to the location, that Sergeant Lank had taken it upon himself to already make contact with the individuals in the house?
Objection.
I'm going to see you at sidebar, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I? Lieutenant, just before we went to sidebar, I'd asked a quick question. Were you aware at the time that you tasked Sergeant Lank to go talk to the folks inside the house that he had already gone into the house to talk to them?
Yes, I did.
You indicated that one of the reasons, I'd like to move back, I'm bouncing around a little bit, I apologize.
I understand.
One of the things that you talked about was the preservation of the crime scene and the lack thereof because of the inclement conditions.
Correct.
There was wind blowing from all directions.
Yes.
There was snow falling.
Yes.
It was icy cold out.
Yes.
There was already snow accumulated on the ground, about 4 inches, you said.
At least it was different spots because of the wind drifts.
Wouldn't that be even more of a reason in a potential homicide investigation to adequately preserve the scene as best you possibly could?
Of course.
Wouldn't you want to, for instance, protect the area? You mentioned a tent.
Yes.
Wouldn't you want to make sure that anybody from the civilian side and or officers don't just start traipsing through the middle of the crime scene?
That was all done.
As a matter of fact, the first responders the EMTs had already done what they needed to do in the scene, and Mr. O'Keefe had been transported to the hospital, correct?
That is correct.
So that was not a concern.
No,
So nobody needed to be inside that scene that wasn't authorized to be there,
that's correct.
civilian or officers.
That's correct.
Who was it that told you specifically where John O'Keefe's body was?
I don't recall specifically. I had a collaborative meeting with Sergeant Lank and Sergeant Good.
Were you aware at the time that you had the meeting with Sergeant Lank that Sergeant Lank did not ever see John O'Keefe's body in the position?
Yes, I did. I don't believe Sergeant Good did, to my knowledge. I believe John O'Keefe may have been in the ambulance at that time.
John O'Keefe, I'm sorry, I got a little confused. John O'Keefe may have been in the ambulance at which time?
When some of the officers arrived.
So if that were the case, then they wouldn't have any personal knowledge of where John O'Keefe's body was either.
Not to your precise locations, yes.
You mentioned a tent, and you said that you, in an answer to a question by Mr. Lally, you did not go back to Canton PD to get the tent. You had a tent in your trunk or something?
That's correct.
When you interviewed with Lieutenant Tully, did he specifically ask you, this is about a month ago, did he ask you about the tent?
I don't recall.
Would it refresh your recollection if you were to review just a small snippet of your report, of his report
Yes.
about your interview?
Yes.
May I approach you on it?
Yes.
With that, and direct your attention to paragraph 4. Tell me if you recognize that document.
I don't recognize the documents. First time I've seen it.
Fair enough. Does it read the highlighted portion and tell me whether that refreshes your recollection about a conversation you had with Lieutenant Tully about the tent?
Okay, I didn't have...
Read it to yourself.
Yes, okay.
You've read that?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
Would you recall telling Lieutenant Tully,
You can ask him if that refreshes his recollection.
does that refresh your recollection at this point?
It doesn't change my recollection.
you said you didn't recollect exactly what you told Lieutenant Tully about the tent. And I'm asking, does that refresh your recollection about what you told Lieutenant Tully about the tent?
Yeah, that's not what I said about the tent.
Okay, so you didn't say, I drove to Canton PD headquarters to retrieve a tent to protect the area where O'Keefe was found from falling snow, but never used the tent due to high winds.
We didn't have a tent at that time.
That wasn't my question. I'm being very specific. Did you say that to Lieutenant Tully?
No, that was misinterpreted.
Okay, so if he got that, if that's in his report, that's incorrect.
It's not accurate, correct?
Is there anything else that you read in that report that's not accurate?
You asked me to read the highlighted version. That's what I read. I didn't read any other part of the document.
I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
You indicated, still staying at the crime scene on January 29th, you indicated on direct examination that the area adjacent to the blood stains that you saw and the drinking glass that you found, that area was somewhat trampled by, you presume, the first responders, the EMTs.
That's correct.
You also indicated that you didn't see any other signs of shoe prints going from the street to the house, correct?
From the scene to the house, correct?
From the scene to the house.
Correct.
Meaning, what do you mean when you say that, from the scene to the house?
So the house, you have the house, and the scene was to the far left, actually on the property line with number 32. So I didn't see any footprints. The only other footprints I saw was where the officers walked around and put up the crime scene tape.
Meaning walking through the yard
Correct.
and putting up crime scene tape.
Correct.
All right. And if somebody had, how many of those sets of prints did you see?
I don't recall.
Did you photograph or seek to have anybody else photograph the area from the scene to the house?
Just those long shots that you saw in the exhibits.
Okay. And the snow was actively falling at the time, correct?
Yes,
So if there had been a print a couple of hours earlier, you very well might not see it.
that is correct.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about the collection of the blood. You found what you thought was blood initially, right?
That's correct.
Pink in color, reddish in color.
Correct.
And you began the process of removing layers of snow, in other words, dusting the area with a leaf blower.
That is correct.
Had you ever used a leaf blower in a crime scene preservation effort?
First time.
First time? And you indicated your testimony was temporary evidence containers to collect that blood, correct?
Yep, we utilized cups, plastic cups.
Those were red Solo cups, right?
That's correct.
The same kind of red Solo cup you drink beer out of at a barbecue?
Yeah, sure, you could.
Objection, Your Honor. Strike.
I'll allow it.
There's nothing special about the red Solo cup?
Other than their plastic, nothing special.
And where did you get those red Solo cups?
We got them from Lieutenant Gallagher.
So in other words, you got the, to use your words, the evidence containers from a neighbor.
Correct.
He had some Solo cups in his house.
We asked him if he had any plastic containers, any type of plastic container that we could utilize.
How far were you from Canton PD? From 34 Fairview to Canton PD? Give me an idea.
Mile and a half.
So even in really bad weather, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, is that right, to drive?
Sure.
You didn't go back to Canton PD to get actual evidence containers, correct?
We wouldn't have temporary plastic containers that what we were looking for. We're looking to take samples of snow. We wouldn't have had, I know for a fact we did not have those. If we needed bags, needle containers, things of that nature, we're all set. But as far as plastic containers that we wanted to utilize, we didn't have them.
Do you have any glass containers?
No.
So Canton PD does not have or utilize evidence collection containers that are plastic?
We have needle containers that are plastic. We have blood swabs that are in plastic containers. But for what we wanted to take a sample, we did not have. So we improvised.
My next question is, certainly Canton PD employs and owns sterile swabs.
Correct.
Sterile swab is in a container that's long, and usually the swab is connected to the lid, pop
Correct.
it out, and then it's sealed
That's correct.
and forensically stable, correct?
Yes.
And the reason that it's sealed and forensically stable is so nothing can contaminate the sample, correct?
Sure.
But
Yes.
just as importantly, the blood sample can't contaminate anything else.
Correct.
Did you go to Canton PD a mile away and get sterile swabs for the blood collection?
Blood was frozen. We didn't think it would be viable.
You didn't think it would be viable?
Correct.
If you touched the swab to cold blood, you think you might get some blood on that swab?
I wasn't sure it would be efficient for testing.
So what you did instead was you gathered red Solo cups from a neighbor, unsterilized, and scooped up the snow with what you thought the blood was, and just carried them back to the truck?
Nope. We took 6 samples, individual samples. Our philosophy was we'll let the crime lab extract it the way they best see fit. Those 6 samples were bagged and then transported back to Canton Police Headquarters and placed into evidence.
Were they covered?
No, not that I recall.
They weren't sealed in any way?
No.
So if somebody sneezed over the top of one of those cups,
They were sealed in a bag, brown evidence bag. At that time, nobody was going to sneeze over the cup.
Do you have a rough estimate of how many people handled those red Solo cups before they were used to collect blood evidence in this homicide case?
You want me to estimate?
Give me an idea.
Sure. Sergeant Lank,
No, I'm sorry. My question was a bad one. Before you took possession of the red Solo cups, do you have any idea how many people before you had handled those Solo cups?
I took them out of a package, so probably none.
How about before they were packaged?
I assume Solo doesn't sell contaminated cups. I would say none.
So they're certainly not forensically stable. They're not sterile.
I don't know what definition you're looking for, but I would agree.
Do you think it's standard practice for a police department to borrow red Solo cups from a neighbor to gather evidence?
Objection.
You can go ahead and answer that, Lieutenant.
Of course not. Nothing about the scene was standard.
Right. The glass shard. I'll touch on the Solo cups in just a second, but I want to talk about the glass shard of the drinking glass. Were you the one that found the drinking glass?
I was operating the leaf blower and uncovered the glass, yes.
So you were the first one. Well, I guess you couldn't tell me if you're the first one, but you noticed it pretty quick.
I wouldn't say it was quick, but we uncovered it.
Okay. And then there is you mentioned a CARS report in your direct examination. There was a report done of where some of these items were found, correct?
You'll have to clarify. I'm not sure what you mean.
Did you mention a CARS report, which is a report of the crime scene, where things were located, mapping of those things?
You objected. It was sustained. I never got to answer that question.
Touche. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. Just going to show you a document and see if you recognize that.
I don't recognize it. I can tell you what it is.
That's okay. If you don't recognize it, that's all I need. Your Honor, may I?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you familiar generally, I don't necessarily need to talk about this one, but are you familiar generally with CARS reports?
Not at all.
Not at all. That's not sort of in your framework?
Not in my realm.
Okay. Are you aware that there is a process by which items of evidence are mapped, or they attempt to be mapped for a crime scene?
I don't do homicide investigations. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Again, with regard to where the blood drops were found, let me go back to one other question I had. You said you took 6 samples, correct?
That's correct.
Did you precisely indicate in any report or note or diagram exactly which blood drops were in which solo cup?
I did not.
As you were using that snowblower and you uncovered the glass cup and more of the blood samples, at any point did you see a size 12 men's shoe black in color?
No.
At any point did you see a man's baseball hat black in color?
No.
You actually dug out a portion of you didn't dig it out, you moved it with your foot, or somebody did, a portion of the berm or the curb that separates the street from the yard, correct?
That is correct.
At any point along that curb line, did you see a men's shoe?
Along the exposed curb line, no.
Did you see it anywhere else?
No.
And you didn't see a hat anywhere else?
No.
You didn't see any bright red taillight material anywhere else?
I did not.
You did not see any clear taillight material?
I did. I did not.
You did not see any black plastic material? No. You certainly didn't see 45 pieces of plastic material?
I did not.
If you had found a broken glass, if you find a broken glass on somebody's yard in a situation like this, did that seem out of place to you?
They were coming from a bar. It didn't seem totally out of place, no.
At the time that you found the broken glass, would you rationally think, well, maybe the rest of this glass is inside the residence?
No.
You did not think that?
No, there was a reason that I didn't think that.
Did you think that, well, let me ask you this. Did you ever go inside the house to search for the other part of the glass?
Absolutely not.
Because you made up your mind initially where that glass came from.
Objection.
You can answer that, sir.
No.
Did you search the house for any other matching glasses?
No, no,
Matter of fact, you didn't search the house for any physical items, did you?
of course not.
Is that because that house belonged to a Boston police officer?
No, it's because it requires probable cause, as you know, which we did not have.
Or at least you didn't think you had at that time?
We knew we didn't have it.
Did you seek it from a judge?
I'm familiar with what probable cause is.
Did you seek a probable cause warrant from a judge?
No, I did not.
Right. Did you ask for consent to search the house?
We wouldn't do consent, and that's in a death investigation.
Yeah, that wasn't my question. My question
No,
was,
I did not.
okay. Is that because you were at the house of a Boston police officer?
No, it's because we wouldn't do it. Because if consent is denied, we still don't have probable cause, and we still couldn't search the house.
But you never asked, did you?
Never asked.
According to your interview with Lieutenant Tully, after going to the scene the first time, you then returned back to Canton Police Department, correct?
Yes,
At that point, you remember having a conversation with Chief Berkowitz, correct?
that is correct.
And you indicated that having that conversation with Chief Berkowitz, that was about Canton Police Department recusing themselves.
Not doing any further investigative interviews, yes.
And you indicated actually in that conversation that you agreed with Chief Berkowitz that Canton should be recused, correct?
He agreed with me.
Was your assessment that the recusal should take place?
Yes, it was.
And he agreed?
That is correct.
Okay. And the reason for that recusal was because of the relationship between the Albert family and the Canton Police Department?
No.
What was the reason for the recusal?
The reason was we had a Boston police officer on another Boston police officer's lawn or property, and that property owner was the brother of somebody in our investigative unit.
Okay. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it would be because of the Albert family having a relationship with the Canton Police Department.
It has to do with Detective Albert having a relationship with his family.
Right. Or the other side of that is his family having a relationship with Canton Police Department.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. Go ahead. Move on, please.
What time was that conversation with Chief Berkowitz?
It was after 8 a.m. when we got back to the police department.
You then traveled back to 34 Fairview to interview the homeowners with Sergeant Lang?
Sergeant Lake was doing the interviews, yes, but I accompanied him.
Okay. Approximately what time did you arrive back at 34 Fairview to engage these interviews?
Approximately 9 o'clock.
Were you and Sergeant Lang well, let me ask you this. At that time, did you know whether Sergeant Lang had already gone into the home?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So you knew that you were not the first person to go in and make contact with the individuals inside the home. That was Sergeant Lang
Sergeant Lake and Sergeant Good, correct.
before you ever got there.
Correct.
Okay. Did they show you any documentation, notes, or anything of that initial interview?
No.
Do you know whether or not they took notes of that initial interview?
I don't.
Do you know whether they recorded that initial interview?
I know they did not.
You indicated that you personally knew Brian Albert. Is that right?
I knew him since I became a police officer, yes.
And so you indicated that you had a professional relationship with him, but not necessarily a personal relationship with him.
Correct.
Did you know that he was in the house before you walked in the house?
No, I did not.
What was your your professional interaction with Brian Albert before you walked into that house that day?
Previously?
Correct.
So in general, as a detective, he was with the fugitive unit at one point. He was helpful when we had a fugitive we needed to apprehend in Boston, things of that nature, job-related things.
Had you ever, for lack of a better phrase, hung out with Brian Albert?
Not a day.
Never socialized with him?
No, not intentionally. It's possible if I went to a retirement party, could he have been present? Possibly, but not that I'm aware.
But you had no social relationship with him?
Zero.
You indicated that there were 5 or 6 people inside the house, including Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe.
Yes, that is correct.
So you clearly knew those 2 people.
I didn't know Jen McCabe. I know that Sergeant Lake was going to speak with her, but I didn't know her personally. I never had a conversation with her.
What was it about Jen McCabe that you recalled as opposed to the other 4 or 5 people that were in the house?
Sergeant Lake was talking to her.
You just remember that name?
That's who he went to talk to.
Got it. So he went back specifically with the intent of talking to Jennifer McCabe.
That's correct.
That's when you accompanied him.
That is correct.
Was that interview recorded?
No,
Did you take any notes about that interview?
I did not.
Did you write a report about that interview?
I did not.
You said that there were, other than Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe, there were 3 or 4 other people in the house.
Yes.
Were those 3 or 4 other people in the house at the time that John O'Keefe was found dead or dying on the lawn?
I don't have the answer to that.
Did you think that might have been an important thing to find out?
Again, I didn't think of that at that time, and I didn't think it was important at that time. I knew that Sergeant Lank had already interviewed people in the house.
You had what you knew at that time, Lieutenant, was you had an officer, a Boston police officer, who was either dead or dying on the front lawn of a house with a bunch of occupants, and you didn't think that it was necessary to investigate or interview those occupants yourself?
No, I did not. At that time, I wanted to not participate in investigative interviews.
You did tell Lieutenant Tully in your interview with him, you volunteered that Brian Higgins was not present when you went back to the house, correct?
I didn't believe he was.
What, you didn't believe he was?
No, I don't recall Brian Higgins being there.
Okay.
I don't recall who the other people were at that time.
But Brian Higgins was not one of them.
I don't know the answer to that. He could have been. I can't say with certainty.
You know Brian Higgins.
I do.
Obviously, you know him well.
I do.
Matter of fact, you occupy sort of the same space at Canton PD, correct?
That is correct.
You might see him most days out of the week.
No, but I know him.
Okay. As a matter of fact, you've got a social relationship with Brian Higgins as well.
I have been social with Brian Higgins, yes.
So you know him professionally and socially. You can't tell the jurors whether or not he was in that home when you went back over there to interview individuals about a Boston police officer who had fallen and was either dead or dying on the front lawn.
Objection.
Go ahead and answer that, sir.
I can't answer that question. I had no conversation with Brian Higgins, so I don't recall.
You do know that on January 29th, well, let me ask you this. Foundationally, did you go back after that series of unrecorded interviews? Did you go back to Canton Police Department and work the rest of the day?
Yes,
Brian Higgins was also at the station for nearly the entire day.
again, I don't recall that.
You're aware that Brian Higgins had been granted a key card for the station?
Yes,
I'm guessing that is a relatively rare thing if you're not a Canton police officer to have a key card and full access to the station.
there were a couple of ATF agents that had that access, yes.
Okay, but he was one of them.
He was one of them, yes.
Is that access restricted, Lieutenant? In other words, does his key card work the same as your key card?
I don't know the answer to that.
He would have, to your knowledge, he roamed throughout the station at will, correct?
I don't know how he roamed. He's a very private person. You very rarely see him. Usually his habits were he'd go up a front stairwell right to his office.
But his access, I guess I'm struggling with the question, his access was not limited to your knowledge.
I don't know the answer to that. I can't answer that to my knowledge.
He could go into any door he wanted to.
I would doubt it.
You would doubt that it would be limited.
I would doubt he'd have unlimited access. The patrolmen don't have full access. It all depends by your grade. Where he's an outside agency, I'm sure he had limited access.
Who has access to the sally port?
The doors, only whoever's in the dispatch area, the overhead doors. There is one pedestrian door that everybody would have access to.
So he would have access to that as well.
Yes.
Where is Chief Berkowitz's office in relation to the rest of Canton PD, the physical building?
The best way to describe it, I don't know if the jury is familiar with the building, but if you were looking from Washington Street dead on, it's the top floor, far left office.
And is that, I don't know this, I'm not being, it's not rhetorical. Is it 3 floors or 2 floors?
So it's really 3 floors, but it's numbered 1, 1A, and 2.
So he would be on 2, 3 physical floors up.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. When you had the meeting that you earlier described with Chief Berkowitz, where you indicated Canton PD needed to recuse itself, was that in his office or someplace else?
I was in the office of the detective sergeant.
Which is where?
It's on floor 1A.
All right, we're going to take a 5-10 minute break.
Where does this be placed in notebooks?